Hey class, this is Nick. This is part two of the Entourage tutorial. What I've done is I've plotted my file from AutoCAD, um, just like we did for the Illustrator part of the elevation tutorial. What I've got, if you look at it, is that 18 by 36 board. And in fact, if I go to Document Setup, you can see that it is in fact 18 by 36. So that's what I've got. My lines came out. I just kept the line weights that I used. At 100%, they look pretty good. Certainly good enough for this tutorial. Although you might want to adjust them if you see something off. But they look pretty good to me. This is our cut line that we made. We can go ahead and keep that in the image. You'll note though you do have to like select everything and make sure that you like release the clipping mask because it's going to come in with one. And then once you've got that, you can begin to work with it individually. We're going to do two things here. One, we're going to add simple labels to it, and two, we're going to add we're just going to add some ground, to the drawing. This is just kind of done pretty easily in Adobe Illustrator. So first thing, I want to use Illustrator to do labels because it's a vector drawing application, and that means, of course, that the lines are mathematically generated, so they're really clean. It's a little bit easier to work with, I think, text in Illustrator than it is in Photoshop, although Photoshop does have that capability. To add labels, in this case, I'm really only going to add the label for the section, but the principles here are going to apply anytime you want to add a label for something. So I go to the text tool, making my font Helvetica. Unless you have a good reason, I would really stick with Helvetica. I'm going for 24-point font size. I can change that later if I want to. I'm going to go ahead and when I right click, I get a cursor, and I'm going to say A, just a capital A. Okay. This is Helvetica regular. Okay. And I've made this A. And if I've got Smart Guides turned on, checked, right, I can grab this and I can put it, and it will align with that section line. That's how I know that this is section A. And then if I hold Alt to make a copy of it, I can align it with section B, and you can see the distance here is supposed to be roughly the same. I can use the arrow keys. I can like nudge it just a couple like millimeters if I need to. Gonna double click that, change it to B because that's section B. And if I zoom out, press Alt, click, zoom out. That's what that looks like. I want to be just really tasteful with it. Don't let the labels distract from the drawing. They just want to be clear and present, but not distracting. Once I've got that A, go ahead and do another Alt copy. I'm going to go ahead and copy it so that it aligns with the ground, and do the same with the B. And that's going to align with the ground and my other A, and just create a really nicely balanced composition. Okay, if you wanted to add a label for something else, you could certainly, Alt copy it again. And you could do something like, elevation. Or, whatever. But just make sure that what you're doing is really clear, really tasteful. You're not like distracted from the drawing. You don't really need labels for drawings like that, though. What I do want to understand is that, this section corresponds with this drawing, and this section corresponds with this one. That's my tastes. Your professors might have different attitudes about that, but really want you to be adding labels in Illustrator instead of AutoCAD, just because AutoCAD tends to do a really bad job with it. It's harder to work with fonts and things. This is just very intuitive, very easy. Like the alignment tools make it very easy. The fonts are more readily available than they are in AutoCAD, so I just prefer to do it here. What I never want to see is just you using the default AutoCAD, that crummy computer font, and not really controlling the size. Okay, so really be careful with that. I do notice though that this is like if I was doing a line drawing with Poche, this would be fine. But because I'm actually going to be adding ground, Poche to this drawing, I might want to go ahead and take these labels, and I just shift clicked, and then I might want to move them up a bit because I'm going to add something to the bottom. And I could just do a rectangle tool and then just kind of make this kind of black box, and then of course I could Alt Shift click to copy it to here, and then again Alt Shift click and extend it to here. And that's pretty good. I kind of eyeballed it, but that's about right. I don't want to I want to make sure I've got enough room for this drawing. I do want to make sure that the ground is substantial enough that it reads as ground, that it has some like density to it. And I can go ahead and use these in my Photoshop file as a way to add tone and poche. Okay. And so now if I've got all that stuff, what I can do is just want to go ahead and save it. And I'll save it I could save it as an Illustrator file, and that's just going to give me those vector lines so they'll start to come in as vector lines. So save it to my desktop. All the settings here, you just keep them as a default. It's totally fine. And that's how you get your file ready for being used in Photoshop. Once you've got that file, go ahead and go to Photoshop, and I can open it up. And it's going to give me a dialog option. You pretty much just want to keep this file to the defaults, except I'm just going to say media box because I want to keep the 18 by 36 size of it. And because I'm going to be printing it to that size and then cutting it, so I don't want it to crop it artificially in this case. Okay, you can see it comes in, and you can see that there's no this kind of checkered field. That checker field is there to show me that what's on there is transparent. That the checkers represent the very background of Photoshop. In order to get rid of that, I need to add a background. So if I add a new layer, I can make sure this box is white. If it's not, you can press D, and that'll give you a black and a white, and then you can just switch it. Okay, so if you press D, it always gives you a black background and white foreground. Or sorry, black foreground, white background. Basically, I just want white, and then I got my bucket, and I can just fill it, and that gives me white. So now our drawing has gone from a vector to a raster, and raster means that it's an image made up of pixels, little bitmap pixels. And if I zoom in, you can start to see that happening. So what looked like it was a smooth line is actually a black bunch of pixels with some gray pixels of different amounts, and it presents the illusion that it is a clean line that has this rounded corner, but you notice that we're actually zoomed in at 800%. Okay, so we've gone from a vector to a raster, and so now this image works a little bit differently than the image did before. But we're still, it looks really good. We're able to edit it, and that's what we're gonna start doing. So to add Entourage to our drawings, I provided you with some, but you can do this in lots of different ways. You can go online to websites like allsilhouettes.com. This is actually a pretty good resource, and you can download something like a list of common people or business people or gymnasts, things like that. You can download these zip files. Once you've got this zip file, you go ahead and open it up, and it'll look like this. So you've actually got an Adobe Illustrator file. Okay, and so you've got all these outlines of people. Okay, it's real simple to take somebody from this and so grab this person here, and I can say copy and go to Photoshop, and I can paste that person in, and I want to paste it as an object for now. Actually, I'll paste it as pixels. That's fine. You can see that it comes in really tiny. I need to scale it. And I'm holding down the Shift key, and that preserves the proportions of it. What I need to do, though, is I want to make sure that it's the right scale. And here I am kind of eyeballing it, like I'm looking at the size of the door. I'm looking at that person and I'm making sure that that person, if that's an 8-foot door, I want a roughly 5.5 foot to 6 foot person. Okay, and when I'm ready, I just check, and then that will render that person as pixels. Okay, now you can keep that person at that just as it is. You could also go in and adjust the opacity of that person. I like that 33% quite a bit because it allows me to see the person as a silhouette, but it also allows me to kind of see the lines of the door. I think it's really tasteful. Where you place your person is really matters, right? Like if you place a person, you might place a person walking. Well, let me show you an example of that better one. But you could place them outside the building. You could place them inside the building, near a door frame or inside the door frame. But there's lots of different ways of thinking about that. Let's go ahead and look at a different one. Let's find a person that seems to be walking. I can copy her. I can place her once again inside the drawing. Let's do pixels. And she's rendered now. And again, I've taken a vector though, and I have changed her into a bitmap. So if I have a figure, and let's say I've got her, I can also do something like so she's not actually on each person I put in is on a different layer, and you probably want to name the layers different things. You could say person 1, person 2, lines, and background. And I would actually go ahead and lock the pixels on these 2 layers, just so that you don't accidentally select them or delete them or something. It's good to keep organized. So what you can do with a figure that's walking is you can use that figure to, oops. That's funny. I thought I locked it, but I'm moving it. Yeah, actually, that's what I need to do. Okay, yeah, I need to click that. Just lock that. Okay. So I have this figure. And if you want to select something, you don't know what layer it is, you can get near it and you can right click it and it'll tell you what is under your cursor. In this case, the background is and person 1 is. So it's very easy to select that person. So I'm going to go person 2 and I can take this person and I can have her walking. And I might want to show her disappearing behind that wall or coming out from that wall. And so I can do that. And then I can make a selection and I can erase part of her. And actually, let's go ahead and give her the shadow treatment. And that might be a way to communicate that a person is going behind some kind of an object, right? You gotta be kind of careful with how you do it. You don't want to make it look bad. You could also rotate her, and have her come around the other side. This kind of depends. If it doesn't look very good, you can always undo it. That starts to lose the person, so I'm not really sure about that. Okay, so there. Okay, so that's an example. Now you don't have to have figures in every drawing. Like sometimes just having a scale figure that is in the same kind of drawing is enough to communicate scale. So for example, I might just take this person and just kind of move them here. I might also go, and I need to show that this door is actually, this kind of panel is open. So I might go back to my Entourage and look for another, walking kind of person. These are people walking, kind of at you. Don't use like the zombie or anything like that. Like you definitely want to, don't use anything that's going to distract from your drawing. Okay, let me take this. This is kind of a cool kind of walking person, little Don Draper. Once again, paste the person in. It's gonna move him. Oops. He's just very small right now. You can always move him and then kind of arrange it later. And you can always, that's not bad because a person's rotating is kind of going in. But if you want to change it, you could go into transform and you could flip it horizontally. So now you've got a person kind of walking out of something. And let's fade him a little bit. And again, you don't have to do exactly what I'm doing, like that 33% or anything like that. I just want you to get a sense of like how, what the differences are. You know, whether somebody is actually maybe rendered in full silhouette, or if someone's rendered, you know, faded, or if someone is lighter but not actually opaque. So for example, I could, if you if you command click, you will get an outline. I'm in the wrong person here. This guy. If you shift click, you get a selection box. So even if you're not, you know, if you're not at the person selected, and then you can take a color, any color you want, actually. Make it pink if I want to, and then I can fill that. You could use that though. I wouldn't do hot pink, but you could use that to create a figure that is gray, but that is opaque. You can see that the kind of difference here, and that might be what you want. So there's lots of different options for working with scale figures. I'm going to go ahead and go back to my... This is why you have to name layers here. Go back to this figure here. Just for consistency's sake. Okay, person 3. You could also say elevation. Person. And you can maybe say section person. Two. There you go. Organization is really key. Okay, so simple entourage. What about a tree? Same process. You could go in, and I've downloaded some trees. If I go into my we got this single trees. I could find something kind of suitable. Copy. Paste. Now you don't have to always go from that website. You know, there are other sources. If you search for Entourage, you search for scale trees. You know, it's all different kinds of things that you can use. So don't feel like you have to always use the same things. And in fact, you shouldn't. Like you should really begin to come up with your own libraries and your own styles. So there's different ways of thinking about this, right? Like you could have this tree could really could be part of the ground and really have a lot of contrast, or you could really fade the tree, you know, quite a bit, you know, even more than our people. So you see that. So it's really the difference between having something that's kind of a foreground element and something that is a strong background element, or like a weaker kind of background element. You might look at that. You might find those kinds of things useful. Oops. And you can stretch these and things, but I like to try to keep the proportions stable, at least while I'm kind of working with them. But you can use these elements in your drawings to help create depth as well as context. So just like I did with the person here, I can take that tree, if I'm really careful with the selection here, I can cut it, and then I can actually show that that is behind my building, okay? And that's a really nice way of showing that context. So that's, kind of entourage. And you can go online and find photographs of things. I have a video that shows you how to cut things out of pictures. So if you want that puppy or that light post or something like that, you can find those things. Vectors are very nice to use because, of course, they are very clean. They're multi-resolution, so like no matter how big they are or small they are going to look crisp and really nice. Bitmaps, which is like if we go all the way back, that's a bitmap, right? Like that puppy is a bitmap, that person's a bitmap. These are things that we got from images online. They aren't going to scale so well, but vector trees, vector people are going to scale infinitely well. So whether you have a half-inch scale detail or a small, or you're zoomed way out, it's going to look basically perfect. So that's really useful. Next thing I can do is I can start to add some texture to the image, and I might start by doing that with a background. And what I've done here, you can actually Google like sky texture and find some really beautiful kinds of images of just kind of clouds or kind of kind of grayscale things. Don't go too dramatic here. Really useful option here when you're looking for textures is to go to search tools under Google and go size, and you definitely want to look at the large size. This will force the search to look for images that have a very high pixel count. The more pixels you have, the better it's going to look, especially when you start to scale it and distort it. If you're just searching for a term and you're not filtering by size, you might not get an image that's got enough detail for you. So I like to do that, and I found this kind of nice image. So I just go ahead and save it, throw it on the desktop here, and I'll go into Photoshop, open that up. Yeah, here we go. So I've got this, and I'm just going to take a piece of it that I think I like, and I can always cut it or recut it later. So I'm just going to copy that. I am going to go ahead and paste that image on a new layer. I'll call this like sky. Paste. Okay, and see it comes out pretty tiny, but I'm actually going to do some things to it. So if I'm looking, and I'm actually going to get a bit of overlap here. So I go Command T for transform, and that would allow me to transform the image. I'm going to turn off the snaps here because it's kind of bugging me. I want to just manually kind of do it for now. Don't be afraid to overlap stuff. It's totally fine. So I'm going to kind of put that in the image. Again, kind of transform it a little bit. I'm actually going to give it a little bit of overlap. I can always trim it later. Okay, and then I'll go and I'm going to do a multiply. And so that actually allows me to kind of see what it will look like in the image. And then I would go ahead and fade it a bit. Just kind of see what that looks like. It's not too bad. Again, the idea is not to overwhelm the image, but it's just to allow there to be some context in it. And so what you can do with that is so you've got that in the image. I want to kind of erase it to a certain degree, so I'm going to go ahead and just kind of crop out. So select it and delete it. And in fact, I probably want to go about halfway between where one drawing ends and one drawing begins. So I'm just kind of cleaning it up a little bit. Okay, then what I can go in and do is I can get a paintbrush. Actually, I can get an eraser, sorry, in brush mode. Make that a pretty big brush. I can use the bracket keys to increase or decrease the size of my brush so I can kind of eyeball it. And then if I make it, let's make it pretty big. And you can see it's kind of got like a fuzzy, I want kind of a fuzzy brush. It's pretty big. Go back and undo that. Let's just see what I got. Yeah, okay. So I want one that's got kind of got a fuzzy kind of edge to it. And I made it pretty big. And then if I hold shift while I drag it, it'll stay in that plane, and that will allow me to kind of fade as I brush here. So I just wanted to kind of fade into the drawing a little bit. So that looks pretty good. And then the next thing that I would do is in that image, once I'm sure I've got the image, I'm going to go ahead and see where my building is, and just basically erase. We'll start here actually, and basically erase that from the background. And if your building is a little bit more complicated, there are other techniques. So that's just using a box because it's just very easy. My building is very boxy. You can see how that starts to really kind of pop, in a way that I really like. If that doesn't work, for you very well, let me go ahead and undo all this stuff. This technique will work. So I'm going to select whole area, and then I'm using the magic wand tool, and I'm going to hold down Alt and click. Oops. And actually, let's go ahead and turn off the sky for now. So hold down Alt and click. That will actually, I'm on the wrong layer. Okay, I got to be on the lines layer. Sorry. Be on the right layer, hold Alt and click, and that will actually subtract the difference from the two selections. Okay, so again, I make a box, I go to the lines layer, I hold Alt, and you see the magic wand turns to a minus sign, and I click, and that will automatically try to find the edges of that. And then if I go back to the sky, I can press delete from that, and that will automatically erase that. Okay, and if I don't like things with the trees, I can go ahead and go to my tree, and I can again command click, and that will select everything in that layer. And if I go back to my sky layer, I can actually knock out. That looks terrible, actually. But that might be useful if you don't have, if your tree's doesn't have any kind of like if you're not doing like an opaque tree, or sorry, if you are doing an opaque tree. In this case, I have this tree. I might because of the way that cloud is, I might move my tree over a little bit. I didn't like the way that looked. You do things often just for aesthetic reasons. So that's kind of a nice background, piece. I would not do that so much for the sections and things. Remember, this is the elevation, and we want to kind of show what it looks like in its context. This is about the space inside the building, and so I don't really want to distract from it. I have shown you some examples, though, of sections that have this element, but again, you have to think of the entire board and look at how this kind of weighs down the bottom of the page. It just gives it like a visual weight that's really nice. It helps kind of create contrast between the building and its surroundings. So I'm really going to look at that. I think that's a good choice here, and I'm not distracting from the rest of the image. So and then once you've got the sky in, I might play with it a little bit. Like maybe I want a little bit more, or maybe I want a little bit less. Probably a little bit too much less there. But subtlety, you don't want to go too crazy with it. So that's the basic kind of principle of a texture, is that you find an image, you modify it, you find the selection that you want, and you kind of clean it up, and that allows you to create something. So let's go in. I can go to another website here. It's called Textures with a Z, and I can find various kind of grunge textures. Things like concrete. You can also just Google things like wood texture or concrete texture. Be very, very careful though, because of the scale of these things. I don't think you'd want to make an entire 20-foot building out of these, out of what's essentially a close-up of some planks of wood. That's going to throw you out of the design. But if I had something like this, where it's really just kind of about grain and color, I might be able to use that. It doesn't have to be accurate. It just shouldn't be wrong. You want to think about the feeling that you're trying to evoke, the scale that you're trying to evoke. I could find this kind of texture, and I could use this to represent concrete, even though it is kind of a scaled up piece of concrete. And in fact, that's probably what I'm going to do. But other times that might not be appropriate. You really just have to kind of use your head. You can't. Nothing applies in every situation. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead, paste this. Same kind of process I did before, where I'm going to look at it as a multiply, and then kind of put it on the building. I might scale it a little bit. And here I'm not as worried about distorting it as I was before. I want to be cautious of where this kind of blemish is here, because I don't want that to really distract too much. So I want to kind of control, where that falls in the image. But that's probably fine. So I got that. I'm going to go ahead and do the same thing I did last time, where I'm going to just make a selection, go to the lines layer, do a magic wand, and that'll at least trim that a little bit for me, the way that I want it to be. Let's call this concrete. And that will let me trim this out. Oops. Actually, so in this case, I've actually done it. What I need to do, though, is I need to do the inverse of that. So because you see when I delete it, that I don't want to knock it out. I want to put the color in there. So if I go to select invert, that gives me the opposite. Okay. So now that I've got that, I can go in and I can start to use my selection tool again. And I could use the selection tool with the magic wand to select. If I shift click here, I can add certain areas to it, very, very easily, and that will help me subtract those. Oops, got to go back to concrete here. That'll let me just subtract those very, very quickly. I still want to let the lines win, so I really want to knock this back, quite a bit, if I can. Okay. Maybe not as much as some of the other things, but I don't want to lose those. I don't want to lose those lines. Okay. Notice so this is not too bad. I might want to remove those mullions and things from that selection, because they are actually a different material. They're not really made out of concrete. So I could go in and basically erase those just by selecting. It gets harder if your building is not rectilinear. I understand that. I could take this shape, and this is kind of problematic in a certain way because it's actually in perspective. So what I might want to do with this, I'm going to go ahead and cut this out and put it on another layer. And I'm going to distort it a little bit. Let's go to image, transform, distort, and I can actually kind of squish. Well, that's actually not what I want. I want to probably perspective. What I want to do is I want it to pinch here and expand here. Okay. And you say, well, Nick, that's not the shape of it. Well, but look at this. Okay, if I go here and I multiply it again, to kind of transform it to fit. Do that. And then if I go back to my lines layer, I'm going to select this, go to inverse, go back to my layer, and go back to, I don't know, it's not like a huge difference, but I've kind of broken that. Like it's supposed to have a bit more distortion. I'm not sure I did that like extremely well, but that's kind of the idea of it. So that might actually help. When we add shadows and things later, that might also help. This is just kind of an idea of how to add that kind of texture to this kind of drawing. So the next part for this elevation would be adding windows, and one way I could do that would be to take something like the cloud texture, because ostensibly the sky is being reflected. So I could go back to my cloud that actually I have selected still, and I could copy it, and then I could go back to my image here and paste it onto a new layer again. And I don't have to be, super accurate with it. I just have to have, clouds in it. And and I want to get enough contrast so that it looks like there's enough kind of glass and enough. There you go. So there'll be some blue and there'll be some clouds, and that'll look like something. So go ahead and do that. And then as I've been doing, I can go into my lines layer again. Let's kind of zoom in. Whoa. I'm going to zoom in here and select the windows and then give it the old inverse selection and erase the piece on the sky layer. And I need to be naming these better here. I'm not doing a very good job. Layer 2 is the door. And I got the windows, and in this case, in the windows, I could do a couple of different things. I've got that on that layer. I can certainly, oops, I'm on the wrong layer now. I'm on the windows layer. I can certainly change that opacity to be something different. I could also kind of play with the hue and saturation of that, and so I can actually darken those windows if I want to. I could do lots of things. I could change the color of the glass so that it's a little bit, more purple or lighter blue if I want to, and I can do a couple of different things here as a way of attempting to make that glass, read, differently. Think about what's made out of. Think about what kind of effect you want to have with it. I'm just kind of playing with it, but and then again, you can always change. You can always change the opacity. But the idea of it is that it actually is different than it looks like something there. Okay. Okay, so going through here, and so that's reading, and then the other thing that I could do here is to start to add some shadows. So I could go in and I could add, double click, add a shadow layer, and the shadows are going to be kind of drawing. So I'm just going to kind of so this will be projecting a shadow down onto the glass, and I could go in with this, and I could even make draw an angle onto it. So if I get my polygonal lasso tool, again holding Alt, I can kind of cut away from that to give it sort of an angle if I want to. So just cut a corner. You can add to a selection by pressing the Shift key and then adding something. But I've got that, and I'm going to go ahead and, well, actually I'm on the shadow layer, sorry. I'm just going to drop some black on there and then multiply it and reduce it a bit. And I'm doing this like a kind of like, I sort of go in and I make too much shadow, and then I can always go in and erase and kind of nudge it if I need to. I'm doing that here, and then I'm going to crop out this piece. And that's not too bad. You can play with the density of that shadow as well, depending upon how dark you want to show that. So there'd be a gap there. There might be a slight gap. There might be a slight shadow here, very slight, because this is actually not a very deep wall. And I'll go ahead and trim. And I can double click to close it, and that'll knock that out. And I do each thing on a layer so that I can have more control over it, play with the opacity, I can copy things. It just makes my life a little bit easier. I think I was doing 45%. And again, and here I'm going to do invert. to get that depth. And then a big piece is like where this crosses inside of the space. Oops, sorry about that. Which is somewhere around here. And so once again, I'm going to add this other shadow. Multiply 45%. And I might need to trim that. I'm going to trim that up a little bit. Yep. Actually, I don't need to trim it. I can probably just transform it. I just did Command T. So that's actually where that shadow crosses inside the space. I'm wondering if I want to do, I'll have to look at it both ways, if I want to do a black on the inside or just leave it as white space. I kind of think, actually I think I want to leave it because I don't want that to conflict with the ground, with what we see as the ground. But that kind of adds a little bit, that helps a little bit. The other thing I noticed about this as I paused it is that there's a little overlap in the line cap from when I copied it from Illustrator. So you'd want to fix that. That's the kind of thing that, I'm sorry, but I would actually pick out on review. So you can either trim it or you can add a little bit of extra black to it, you know, depending upon how your scene is set up. I might just go ahead and trim it. The other thing you can do, this is kind of hacky, but, well, yeah, you got to make sure that you're following the same line all the way down. But just within a few pixels, if you wanted to, I'm going to hit D and then flip that. You could just drop a big bar of white on top of it, and then that's a lot less offensive. I just can't stand it when those things look like that, because it just is like it's bad craft. So if I Alt copy shift that over to the other side, I should be able to, yeah, just kind of take care of that little knob on the end there. It's only a few pixels, but quality counts. And then just, you could go ahead and do the same up here. If I did it, I would be more careful about it than I'm being right now, if it was for my class, but I'm just showing you the principle here. Anyway, so that's just cleaner for me than it was. So you know, that might be the way to make that door read better. I think it helps to kind of understand that. You can also do some things with shadows. If you want to do a softer shadow, like we did before, I can take an eraser that's got a brush, and I can carefully kind of pull that line down, just like we did with the background before. And that might give you, so this might be a hard shadow because it's the edge of this, but this might be a softer shadow because it's actually a transition between those two spaces. And I'm holding down shift so that I get a straight line, like it just holds it, and then that kind of gives me a gradual kind of shadow. I kind of like that. And I can always transform that if I start liking it, and sort of play with that gradient a little bit if I want to. And I just keep noodling with it. Anyway, so that's the idea. You can do that with a soft shadow. The other thing you can do, if I go back a couple layers here, is blur it. So I can use the layer filter, and I can say blur, and I can distort it with a Gaussian blur. It's not quite doing what I want it to do though, but you could do that, and then you could kind of expand it and then crop it. Select invert. And that, I don't know, I don't like that as well as the other method that I did. So anyway, that's a way to think about that. But the more I'm looking at that, like what I just did compared to the way that it was, I do think I like the kind of softer edge on it. So these are all things that you have to visually experiment with. You can't just do it one way and then kind of leave it. You really got to think about what makes the image read well, what communicates. Okay. So that's the elevation. I mean, you could add some more entourage. Looks like it might need some color or something like that. But there's other materials that you can experiment with. Like the concrete's pretty straightforward. I think I lost all my links here. But if I was looking at something like wood texture, you definitely a lot of images that you could find, like one of these big ones. That might be helpful. Just be really careful. Seamless textures are great because they will copy multiple times. There's all kinds of different effects that you can get. There's light woods, dark woods. I would use the white wood. That's for something else. But so there's some ideas here that you can start using. Just kind of experiment with, and your TA and I will sort of help you with that.